Hey everyone, welcome to this webinar slash fireside chat on how to write effective proposals and about content management in bidding. I'm Gaurav. I'm the co-founder and chief product officer at Inventive, and I'm incredibly excited to be talking to Anthony Rossi. Anthony is a proposal director at Talkdesk, and he's been in the proposal and bidding space for close to 8 years. He's incredibly excited and passionate about this area of bidding and proposal management. So I thought it would be great to get his take and insights on some of the things that we feel are really important for this space. So welcome to the chat, Anthony. Really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. Can you start by telling us a bit about yourself? What do you do? And what is the role of a proposal manager and proposal director?
Yeah, so I've been a proposal manager or in proposal management for about 8 years now. I worked up from just being basically a proposal writer up to being a proposal director where I ran my own team. Um, Even in running my own team as a proposal director, I always try to keep very involved in the proposal management side of things, and that's kind of my expertise. I'm a much better proposal manager than I am a people manager. But I think that only gives me more credence when I talk about how we do proposal management and in mentoring a team of proposal managers. The main thing proposal managers do is they lead a company's response to requests for proposal, sometimes called RFPs. These are, as many of the people in the audience probably know, sort of something that's flowed down from government procurement, where government procurement had to send out documents that showed that they'd done due diligence in selecting a product or solution. And RFPs are the way they kind of show that due diligence. Proposal managers, when they're running these responses, they're part project manager, part editor, and part sales strategist. And they can oftentimes do a fair bit of writing as well, depending on the company and who's available to do the writing for these responses.
Got it. Awesome. And can you tell us a bit about how did you end up in proposal management space specifically?
Yeah, sure. So I actually got a degree in English, but it wasn't really a literature degree. I was very interested in linguistics and specialized in discourse analysis. And through that, I kind of decided that what I wanted to do with my career was to go into technical writing. So when I got my degree, I actually just quit my job. I was working at as an operations coordinator at a call center. I quit my job without any sort of like thing lined up, and I just knew that I wanted to get into a full-time writing position. And it
Mm,
took me about 6 months to find something that really fit, but it was a sales operations job actually. But in the job listing, they mentioned that it would be very writing heavy. And I was really interested in that because I had an operations background and a writing background. So I went in, I interviewed, and when I was in the interview, the VP of sales operations asked me, "Is like, have you ever heard of RFPs?" And I said, "No, I have no idea what that is." And he said, "Oh, well, you'll
mm,
hate them, but you're hired, so come on board." And so I came on
mhm.
board, and really my first writing job was just doing these RFPs for the sales operations. Like I was involved in other parts of sales operations, but I just did RFPs. And it was in that sales operations role. And it wasn't until maybe 3 years in that I really realized that there was a whole network of people just like me doing essentially the same job. Um, and as I saw that, I really wanted to get more into that community. And that was really where my career took off.
Got it. Okay. And is this community the APMP community that we are talking about, or is there like a different community that you're referring to here?
No, yeah, it's APMP, but APMP kind of came to me slow. I first started meeting these people through like tool user groups. And then they started mentioning, like, I'd go to conventions or conferences, and people would start mentioning RFPs, and in the same breath, they'd talk about the APMP. And that's when I got really, really interested. I'm like, oh, wow, there's like an entire career path for these people that I didn't know about. Like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
just going from sales operations specialist to sales operations manager. I could just go into this as a career.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And for the audience, if people might not know, APMP stands for Association of Proposal Management Professionals. It's a community of about 14,000 people that are in the bidding space. It's a very tight-knit community, and people are like very helpful to each other. And I think, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, you are one of the chairs of the Colorado chapter at APMP as well.
Yes, that's correct. I try to be very involved.
Awesome, awesome. Can you maybe, before we jump into the meat of the discussion, can you tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like as a proposal director at Talkdesk?
Yeah, sure. So, at Talkdesk, I'm mostly responding directly to proposals, as I said. So, a lot of my job is about playing air traffic controller for communications related to those proposals, making sure that team members' questions get to the right people and that those people, the subject matter experts, actually respond to them. So, I usually start my day by checking Slack and emails, and I compile a list of items that I need to follow up on, whether that's checking with legal to see if they're done with red lines or checking with professional services to see if they have a budgetary statement of work drafted up. There are things that
Hmm.
people ask, and I just need to be the person who's kind of sitting at the hub and managing the flow of information. Um, Once that's done, if I have new projects, I'll do the initial setup for those projects, and I like to use a project management tool. Right now, I use Asana, but I've used other project management tools in the past. Getting that project set up first thing in the morning is very important because generally, once that's done, my day, I just sort my task list by due date, and then I work straight down the list. And that can consist of a lot of different things. There are a lot of things that make up the individual milestones of proposal management. Some of that is absolutely that aforementioned follow up, right? Like checking with
Hmm.
people, being like, "Hey, this was due yesterday. Have you got it?" Or "Hey, this is coming up. Or do you think you're going to make that timeline?" Other bits include things like importing projects into a proposal management tool, managing the timelines in Asana and kind of like publishing them so people have a good understanding of what the project looks like. I lead
Hmm.
status meetings and review workshops where we can kind of do hands on work on the proposal and make sure we're on track. I will very occasionally compose responses to requirements myself and do some writing on the proposal itself. I will also review and edit other people's responses when our subject matter experts contribute responses. I'll try to edit them and kind of style edit them as much as possible. Um, I'll export projects into their final format. I do a lot of like the editing and layout for that exported project, bundle things up for submission, and generally manage submission and just making sure that it actually like the customer confirms it and that they get it on time. Some other things that happen later and which are kind of important to understand for later in the conversation, I think, are that I also have to kind of manage the content in our answer library. And this
Hmm.
often takes place at the end of a project where we may have net new answers that need to be incorporated into the library. So that's my day to day.
Got it. Okay, cool. Let's jump into like the proposal writing space a little bit more. What, according to you, comprises of effective proposals?
So a lot of people tend to think of proposals as sales documents, and they are, absolutely. You do want your proposal to be persuasive and compelling. You do want it to sell. That's true. But more than that, RFPs are really a contract negotiation tool, right? Like they were adopted by private business, not because they have to show their paperwork in the same way the government does, but because procurement people looked at the way RFPs were structured and said, this is a really effective method of communication. It's a very aggressive way to make sure that we're getting our needs met and that we're putting sort of the sellers on the back foot right off the bat. So really, a lot of times RFPs are procurement's opening barrage in negotiations. And so because of that, for me, the most important thing about a proposal isn't just that it's persuasive, it's also that it's got to set up our legal team for success when they begin negotiation. We don't want to stay on the back foot. And that means, a good proposal is one where you are honest about the capabilities that you have. Because if you aren't honest, if you're just trying to sell or just trying to come up with reasons to say yes instead of no, you're going to leave a minefield for the people that touch that account after you, whether it's legal people who are trying to figure out how to agree to something that you said that we shouldn't have agreed to, or whether it's implementation people who are now being committed to a type of implementation that they aren't prepared for. Even after implementation, RFPs can have a big deal, like a big impact on renewals. If you promise something in an RFP that you can't deliver on in the first year, then you're likely to just lose that customer. So, um, you know, I'm in a very privileged position. I'm not paid on commission. So when I walk into an RFP, my goal is not just to write an RFP that sells. For me, my goal is to write an RFP that is representative of what we're actually offering, and that will allow the customer to genuinely make the best choice for what they're looking for.
Got it. I really love the way you put it. I think I've spoken to like a lot of proposal managers, but I think your view on this is very unique. That it's almost a negotiation document than like a sales document, which is a very interesting view. And yeah, totally. I think as we've been working with some of our clients as well, we see that a lot of times clients are trying to oversell themselves and trying to figure out how to get the best foot forward, which is of course the goal, but I can see how just being like super accurate is very important in writing these proposals. What would you say are the how would you measure the success of an effective proposal, or how do you measure the success of a proposal team in general? Like, how do you do that at Talkdesk, or how would you do that generally in an ideal scenario?
So I think that Talkdesk generally does a good job of this, but what I'd say is that a lot of people will immediately, if you were to ask this question of any proposal manager, they'd probably instantly jump to win rate, which is very fair. Like, win rate is how a company makes money. You win a deal, you get money. So that makes sense. But the truth is that like I love my job, but again, like the RFP is a small part of the overall sales cycle. And my proposal is not going to be the reason at the end of the day why someone chooses our product or doesn't choose our product. Really, for me, a better metric of success is what I call through rate. And if you're using like a CRM like Salesforce, this can be really easy to measure. If you have like very good stages in Salesforce, you can very easily see where, you know, if you're in sales stage 3 and you do a proposal, and after you submit that proposal, you move to sales stage 4. Well, congratulations. The proposal has done what it was meant to, and that it hasn't eliminated you from the running. And that means it's a successful proposal. So that through rate, I think, is one of the most important metrics of success for the proposal team. But you also probably should be considering operational metrics. And this is where even like advanced proposal teams generally fall down, is that they aren't thinking about, good proposals really only happen when you have the time to spend on them. So through rate is, yes, your ultimate goal. You want to have a good through rate, but it's just as important to know, like, are we managing the pipeline well? Are we doing the operational process well? Are we making sure that we're hitting our deadlines well? And for that, there are a couple of other operational metrics that I like to look at, like velocity, which is the percentage of milestones in your project plan that you're completing on time or before. I also like to look at content library usage, right? How much of your content is being reused versus being used net new? And again, as we move into talking about content management, there are some interesting questions there. But ultimately, if you are answering 70% of your content from the library, you're saving yourselves a lot of time. And it is also just a good sort of measure of the health of your library. I'd also say that capacity and time management, which is especially a passion of mine, is important to measure. You need to know if your people are being burned out, right? Ultimately, the act of editing and putting together and composing a proposal, it has a lot of creativity that's required. And creativity is not something that can survive burnout. So making sure that you're measuring those metrics, which kind of reflect, like, is my team burning out? Are they able to stay on top of their work? Are they working late nights? Watching those and knowing what levers to pull to make sure that people aren't overburdened is really, really important if you want a high quality of creative work.
Got it. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the burnouts in the proposal management space? I haven't heard a lot about that, so I'm curious to dig a little deeper into that.
Yeah, burnout is actually a really insidious thing. We're not actual air traffic controllers.
Hmm.
People's lives are generally not resting on proposals. But there's a couple of people, I don't have their names off the top of my head, but I could probably provide them at a later date or in a follow-up, who
Hmm.
have shown that, like, yeah, this this profession is really, really stressful. And I think what is very stressful about it is that, if you're in marketing, you have deadlines and commitment times that you want to meet, but they're not really hard deadlines. The consequence of missing those deadlines is not incredibly stressful or bad. You can let things slide. And we see people in marketing who frequently do.
Mm-hmm.
Proposal managers wake up every day and they have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 really concrete deadlines that they cannot miss. It's more like working in a newsroom even than working as a marketing manager, right? Because you have to produce and you have to produce on time. And those times are not even being set by people, unlike a newsroom where the times are being set by people on your team. Those times are largely arbitrary. They're set by your customers. Your customers may not even really have a good understanding of how difficult the thing they're asking you to do is. And they may end up being really recalcitrant and trying to reschedule or find a time that's better for you. So those deadlines are a constant aggressive background noise to your whole day. Like every proposal manager wakes up knowing that they have something that's due and they can't avoid it. And I think that leads to a lot of burnout. If you have 9 things that are due and you're thinking about them constantly every day, of course you're going to be burned out.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally see that the deadlines are the ones that really get to people. Yeah, that totally makes sense. If you were to give, let's say, what are your what would you suggest are your top 3 tips for proposal managers to write more effective proposals?
So the first thing I would say is really, I would say that you should start by realizing that it is creative and that because of that, more time poured into it isn't necessarily better, right? Like
Hmm.
I feel a lot of people will be like, well, I just need to put more time in. I need to work these extra nights. It's understandable, right? You want to produce something good, and putting in the elbow grease is a very easy way to produce something that's good. But
Mm-hmm.
this is partially creative. It's not something that you like. It's really not viable to work harder to get to a more creative place. And so for me, I feel like the big mistake that a lot of proposal managers make in trying to do really well is that they work too many hours and they work too
Hmm.
fast. It's absolutely a thing where, yeah, you want to get in, you want to jump in, and you want to work fast and work as hard as you can in order to get over the deadline. But the faster you move without actually like really looking where you're jumping, the more likely you are to run into rework. So really, in some ways, if you have a project that's like it's due in a week and it takes 10 hours to do, and you have a project that's due in 3 weeks that would take 10 hours to do, what I find is that in 3 weeks, a lot of times you'll hit that sort of like 10-hour mark. It's very easy to like keep a good pace and get everything done. But if you're trying to do something in a week that would normally take 10 hours, you might spend 15 hours on it because you're running this direction and you're running this direction, and you
Hmm.
end up just pursuing things that are dead ends, or you end up doing things that need to be redone because you didn't
Hmm.
look before you leapt. So the first piece of advice I have is to just slow down. Like slow is smooth and smooth is fast. You'll get more
Hmm.
done if you make the conscious decision to keep the number of hours you work to about 8 a day. Like maybe about 4 hours dedicated to proposals and 4 hours to, overhead administrative work, meetings, etc. But don't really expect that you're going to be able to work more than 4 hours on a proposal at any given time. The second thing that I would say is to like a tip I would give is that to realize that people do read, but they tend to skim when they read. So the things that you write, they're not just going to get tossed in the trash. People will read them. But if you produce something that is like a big giant block of text, well, they're not likely to read them well. You want to create something that's very skimmable. So I always suggest to proposal managers who are writing to make sure that you can skim your thing and still get information. And mostly that boils down to really effective use of headers, varying formatting. So, use bullets, use inset paragraphs, use quotes, use call out boxes, use images to break up the page. You want the page to be easy to navigate, which means that the page formats should be a little varied so that it's easier to tell kind of where in the document you are. And you should have
Mm-hmm.
lots of white space. White space helps people skim and helps them orient themselves. So a good, compelling proposal probably is not one that has, block paragraphs like you're reading a novel. It's not a novel. It's not as fun as a novel. You've got to remember that. So make sure that you're making it easy for people to skim and making it easy for people's attention to a sort of alight on those things that are most important. And then, sort of the third piece of advice I would give is review, review, review. Right? Like the truth
Mm-hmm.
is that um, if you're writing something that's 40 pages, you're likely to not catch everything. Um, but the more that you build in sort of good review processes, the better off you'll be. Because, like, yeah, maybe a few grammatical mistakes or a few spelling errors won't make a big difference, but they'll kind of like subconsciously weigh on the person who's reading it. Like a lot of grammatical errors can kind of maybe leave them walking away with the impression that you're not as professional as the competition. And the
Mm-hmm.
only way to catch those things is to build in time for review. And this kind of is maybe the opposite side of the coin of just what I said about creativity and understanding that this is creative work. Also understand that you need time to reread everything that's been put in front that's you're about to put out, because you will read questions and you'll see that your subject matter expert didn't understand the question, or maybe misread it, or maybe thought that they were talking about something that you kind of assumed they would understand, but which they've kind of missed the mark on. And in those cases, the only way you'll catch that is by reading it yourself and putting eyeballs on the page.
Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think great pieces of advice. Like just be slow and focused in your approach, make the content skimmable and formatted nicely, and just review, review, review. Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's jump gears a little bit, Anthony, and get into this idea, into this space of content management. I think you've alluded to it a couple of times in our call. And can you maybe just start by telling us why content management is such a big deal in the proposal world?
Yeah. So, I mean, content management is probably the biggest time saver that you have for doing proposals, right? Like, honestly, if you are working in a private industry space like mine and you're mostly just selling software that's off the shelf, you should be probably reusing about 80% of any RFP should come from reused content. Yes, you want to make sure that it's customized. Yes, you want to kind of like tweak it to make it more appropriate for the customer, but your software is your software. So content management, especially in sort of the software space, is your biggest time saver. It's also kind of the best way to keep your subject matter experts from hating you, right? Because whether you are in tech or not, if you constantly come to the subject matter experts with the same question, eventually they're going to say, like, why am I answering the exact same question 5 or 6 times a month? It drives them nuts. And I've been in that place before when we had no content management. So content management is just a really great way to save time and to make it easier on the resources that you're relying on to compose proposals. Um, it's so that's why it's important. Was there a second part to your question?
I think, yeah, the question that I asked was basically why content management is such a big deal in proposals and like bids and stuff. I guess the point that you made is a lot of the content could potentially be reused. So that's why like managing content properly and effectively is important. And the other point that you make is, I think, subject matter experts like would generally be unhappy if you are going to them asking about the same thing, which makes sense for the efficiency of the organization. Can you
Yeah.
maybe just dive a little bit about what type of content are we talking about here for maybe people who may not have as much background in the proposal space?
Yeah. So for proposals, both public and private, content that is used by proposal managers can be sorted into two sort of different categories. The first is boilerplate content, and this is probably what a lot of people think about. It's the more marketing-y stuff, right? It's like, your cover page, a little bit like your cover letter about the company, etc. Those are really important to have. But especially if you're working in private industry, most of your content is going to come in the format of question answer pairs. The idea being that, like, if the customer asks this question, how do you answer? And question answer pairs kind of belies the fact that questions may not be called questions all the time. They may be called requirements. It may even be down to the point of like terms and conditions, where if someone has a specific legal term that they say in an RFP, you have a specific canned response that you want to include as part of your legal playbook as part of that negotiation. So really the excuse me. Um, so really like the content that you're mostly looking at is this, you have a question, how do you answer it? And for like a lot of private tech companies that I've worked at, you could have maybe like a handful of like 20 boilerplate things that you use on the regular, but you could have maybe 5,000, 10,000 of these question answer pairs, depending on the complexity of your product.
Hmm. Got it. Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah. That so content management is definitely like a big problem and a challenging problem. I'm just curious, like, what are the biggest challenges that you personally have faced in content management and proposal managers around the world probably face?
I mean, the biggest challenge with content management anywhere is just the way that we conceive of it. It's frequently a full-time job, but people rarely give us the headcount to deal with it as if it were a full-time job. It's something that you kind of have to pick up in the cracks of the work that you're already doing. Um, my company does not currently have a dedicated content manager, and we need one, but we don't have one.
Mm,
And I've worked at many companies where it's the exact same story. A dedicated content manager is sort of necessary to achieve the quality of content that we want, that we
mm,
say we want, but we're not really willing to throw the money at it, right? So some other like things that arise from this that you could consider to be sort of the tactical challenges of content management are things like duplicates. It's very easy for duplicates to appear in a library. Um, Content aging out, if you don't have someone on there making sure that the branding is right. If your company changes the name of a product, well, now you've got to redo all of the answers that mention the name of that product. And so you can have content that ages out in that way, or content that's just no longer true, or content that was true for 2020, like employee count, but now you need to make sure that you have updated employee counts or updated sort of like financial estimates. So that's definitely one of the things that can arise from not having a full-time content manager. I think a more subtle one, but possibly more insidious, is the idea of findability. So you'll have maybe the perfect answer for a question, but the way that the customer has posed that question, it won't appear when you go to search for it unless you just
mm.
know exactly the right word, or maybe there's a synonym for a word that you need to know. And so you have that content, but your subject matter experts are like, well, I just answered this question. Why didn't you save it? I'm like, well, I probably did save it. I just couldn't find it when I went to search for it. So findability is one that maybe some people don't think about, but which I've constantly been plagued by in my career. And then, the last thing I'd say is that there's an obstacle in capturing net new content in a way that's usable. We have tools that do it more reliably now, but even so, like, if a lot of times those tools will still be prone to like duplication. If you're not careful about how you moderate the content that you're trying to pull in, you may end up with a lot of duplicates, or you just may have a process where people forget, right? Like I have solution engineers who just they'll write a nice piece of net new content, and then you'll come to something later and you're like, I just remember reading something like this, and you'll go and look for it, you won't find it, and you'll go ask the SE, and they'll say, well, I didn't bother to click the save to library because I didn't think it would come up
Mm.
again. So that's probably those things, the duplicates, the aging content, the findability, and capturing new content. Those are the things that I think are those tactical things that arise from not having a dedicated content manager.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we work with a bunch of clients and some of them have like huge sets of documents and libraries that they deal with on content. And before using Inventive, essentially they've been struggling a lot to kind of get through the content piece. So I can totally understand the challenges that people face. Um, just switching gears a little bit. So the rage right now, the talk of the town right now is generative AI, and proposal management is one of the spaces where generative AI, of course, can have like huge impact. What's your sense so far on how generative AI can actually help the proposal management space?
So the first thing that I think it can really help is I think that it can serve as a replacement for some of the previous generation of automatic response tools that are on the market right now, which largely kind of like do big bulk updates from like your content library. And these can be very hit or miss, right? Like the
Hmm.
tools that are on the market right now, you have a good auto response tool and a good healthy library if you're hitting 10 to 20% of the questions, right? Generative AI has the potential to hit a lot higher percentage of those questions in that sort of like first automated pass. And I think that's really powerful because, yes, it's not going to get every question right. But if every question that it does get right saves you 5 minutes and you are answering 100,000 questions in a year, well, even an increase of 10% could save you, dozens of hours just in operational costs. So I think that's one way it can help. But the other way I think that it can help is something that I think is a little less obvious because the focus is on sort of like the magic of ChatGPT being able to write a coherent sentence, which is cool and all. But I think that the thing that people are kind of sleeping on is this idea that generative AI can help with content management. And what I'm starting to see that I'm really excited for is, we talked about the presence of question answer pairs as being the core building block of a library. Those question answer pairs are the core building block. And then, when you are missing a question answer pair, you might have to go out and find a piece of content, technical documentation, and like something on the internet, something that someone said on Slack. You have to go find that and you have to build a question answer pair basically from scratch. And I think that generative AI is actually going to take that relationship and it's going to flip it upside down, where the core of your content management strategy is no longer the question answer pair. Instead, the core is in reusing that content that's already being generated by your company, whether it's the ability, like whether it is technical documentation or marketing content or Slack conversations or email conversations or intranet conversations, taking that and being able to digest it so that you start with the content that your company is already generating just by virtue of it being a company that needs to operate, and now can kind of filter in, and generative AI can turn it into those question answer pairs as you're working on the project. And yes, you can now save those question answer pairs, but then the focus moves from all
Hmm.
this bespoke question answer pair stuff that you have to do on your own. It switches focus to how can we reuse the content that we're already generating. And I think that saves a lot of the time troubles that you have when trying to do content management.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think generative AI definitely enables like a new world where we can, like you said, like I think the analogy that you used is perfect. Like you can switch the way the content has been used overall for like decades, probably in the proposal space.
Yeah.
What stigma have you heard about AI in proposal management space, and what are your thoughts on them?
So I think that the thing that was always at the front of my mind, and I think that other people that I've spoken to feel the same, is the worry about hallucination, right? Hallucination is just not something that large language models have been able to escape. And that's fair. The fact that a large language model can give you a very confident answer that is 100% wrong is troubling. But, what I'd say to those people is people can give you answers that are 100% wrong, right? And the difference is that a person might spend 30 minutes coming to a completely wrong answer, whereas, the generative AI model has done it in less than a second. So in that case, like you're at the same place either way, but you've saved 30 minutes if the generative AI answer gives you a wrong answer too. Just as a little bit of an anecdote here, when I started doing proposal management, there was sort of like this canned response that I used for maybe 2 dozen proposals. And it was sort of about our architecture. And at one point, I had a question about our architecture, and I walked over to sort of like our director of cloud services desk. And I was talking to him and kind of like walking him through some of the questions I had. And he stopped me and said, "Whoa, wait, what's this answer right here?" And I was like, "Oh, well, that's this answer about our cloud architecture that I got from marketing." And he's like, "This is just wrong. Like, this is made up. Have you been sending this to people?" Um, and yeah, it turned out that this thing that I'd sent out to dozens of customers was just like absolute fiction. It
Mm.
was just marketing nonsense that was not reflective of our actual architecture, and I had no idea. So, if you are worried about hallucination, fair. But worry about people too, because people can absolutely get it wrong. And the answer to people getting it wrong is the same as the answer to generative AI getting it wrong, which is review, review, review. Just, treat generative AI like you would any of those, let's be honest, like not all of your salespeople are going to be, you know, award winning writers. Some
Mhm.
of them are not going to be very good at writing, and you know that. And you know that there are some people that you just can't let the proposal go out the door until you've reviewed the answers that they've given. Just treat it like that. Don't let anything go out the door until you've reviewed it, because that's what you should be doing anyway.
Yeah, totally. And just digging into that point a little bit more on hallucinations, I think. So I used to work at Google's AI team at Google AI and Google Brain when we were building the first versions of these like large language models a couple of years ago. We totally saw like how challenging this problem and it is still very challenging. So I know there are like a lot of solutions out there doing claiming to be Gen AI first solutions for proposal management, but like it's an incredibly hard problem. And I totally agree with you that there needs to be more review and also like technical expertise on the teams to kind of solve this problem.
Yeah.
Um, there is also a lot of stigma in the proposal management space. This is on the other side, probably. Like I heard this at one of the APMP conferences. Like people are scared that AI is going to take their jobs, and proposal managers are going to struggle because of AI. What's your take on that whole point?
Well, I think that would be very fair if we were staffed to the point we needed to be anyway, right?
Hmm.
Like, one of the big obstacles we face is that in general, sales leadership does not always see the value of proposal teams because they don't see them as like a revenue generating center. So they see them as operational cost and they just push that operational cost down, right? There are many, many things that I could accomplish. If you were to double my headcount at Talkdesk right now, not a
Hmm.
single one of those people would go to waste. I would find things to do for all of them because there are so many things that could be done. The only difference is that now, like, I don't think that, at least in my experience, anyone is truly talking about replacing a like a proposal manager. In fact, in my experience at Talkdesk has almost been the opposite. We have been we're always looking to get headcount, and we've never got it. But the moment that we heard about generative AI as a solution, well, all these people who would never have considered a proposal manager for hiring a new proposal manager to address this, well, now they're all interested. Now they're all talking about like, well, what can generative AI do in this space? So if
Hmm.
anything, don't view it as someone taking your job. View it as a way to kind of almost trick sales leadership into investing into a nice new buzzword that just happens to benefit you. Because
Hmm.
the truth is, you probably weren't going to get that headcount that you needed anyway.
Nice. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Awesome, awesome. All these insights have been incredible, Anthony. Excited and really grateful for you for sharing all of these things. I mostly got through most of my questions. I had just one last question before I let you go. As a proposal manager, what do you personally do to get better at your role?
Um, I think that what I do that pays off the most is that I remain curious. Um, you know, I try to pay attention in meetings that other people might be like, well, this doesn't affect me, so I can just zone out. I try to ask questions of other people at my company and try to understand what their jobs are, you know. And I just try never to fall into a fixed mindset. A great example of this is when we talk about content management. A lot of the way I do my content management is not informed by the way proposal managers do content management. It's actually a lot of what I picked up from talking to tech support teams who were
Hmm.
making like knowledge bases and wikis for customers and how they were managing this problem of how do you manage knowledge. And that if I hadn't approached that with sort of an interdisciplinary way of thinking and curiosity about what is out there that I might be able to apply, I, never would have come to these solutions that are now integral to the way I manage content. Similarly, the way I think about capacity is a lot less informed by sort of like project management ideals and actually a lot more informed by sort of talking to developers about Scrum and how they do burn down and how they manage their time for something that is fundamentally a pretty creative work that can be hard to estimate how long it's going to take.
Hmm.
Um, so that's how I get better, is not just by listening to the conventional wisdom or the regular things that people are saying, but by staying generally curious about the world around me and never thinking to myself, well, I'm done. I figured it out. I know everything there is to know.
Nice, nice. Yeah, this reminds me of a book that I read a couple of years ago called Range. It was by some Epstein guy, I forget the full name, but it basically talked about like the best way to do something or the most creative and innovative way to do something is actually draw ideas and inspiration from like analogous areas and kind of use that in your area of expertise. Awesome.
Yeah.
Anthony, thank you so much. This was great. A lot of great and useful insights here. Anything else you wanted to add before we part ways today?
No, just that I'm really happy that you took the time to interview me. I'm always, I love talking about this stuff and I love kind of exchanging opinions and going out there and trying to figure out like what does the future of this career look like? And I appreciate
Hmm.
that you're taking the time to ask those questions.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I think you are one of the most passionate people in this space, and it's always great catching up with you. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Anthony. Bye.
Bye.